If you follow the slide behind me, you'll see the pink there shows lack of it, and the majority, the darker it cuts, is the majority of atheists. You'll find the majority of atheists in China, as you see it up there, and England, where I did my doctoral work. China has the highest amount of atheists living in a single country, with 50% of the population describing themselves as non-believers. Around 40% of the people living in China describe themselves as atheists, compared to 13% of those across the world. In the 2012 poll by Wynn Gallup International, surveyed more than 50,000 people across 40 countries, whether they consider themselves religious, non-religious, or convinced atheists. Overall, 84% of the world's population, which is estimated to be about 6.9 billion, identify with some kind of religion or spiritual connection. The Global Religious Landscape, issued by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, argued this. Many of the religious unaffiliated do not hold religious or spiritual beliefs, as the study stressed. As 2010, there were 1.1 billion religiously unaffiliated people around the world, and accounting to 1 in 6, 60% of the worldwide. I found in my research that the atheist position, or the agnostic skeptics, are growing at a fast rate. They really are growing. This is interesting. The Pew Forum did some research about religious knowledge. For example, what are the 10 Commandments? What are the 4 Noble Truths of Buddha? What was the name of Jesus' mother? Simple religious questions. And you know who scored the highest on these? It wasn't the Protestants. It wasn't the mainline white Protestants, or the black Protestants, or the Catholics, or the Hispanics, or the Mormons, or the Jews. You know, the atheists. They got the highest scores on these tests. So be careful in debating a good, well-informed atheist. They know what they're talking about, at least most of them, who are at least engaged in the public world. They have to know what to do to defend their view. And a lot of times religious folk don't even read the books they hope to say that they follow. Like most Muslims do not pick up a Quran. Most Christians don't even, their Bible gets pretty dusty on their shelf. But for the atheists, they're going through it. They're looking for problems. Not all of them. Some are honestly seeking. And we don't want to classify and do generalization about people. Okay. So when you ask general people about the 71% of people who pick, 71% of the people who choose other on the forum for non-religious, they won't call themselves atheists. They'll say, I don't know what to call myself. I'm just not a Christian, I'm not a Buddhist, I'm not a Muslim. I don't not believe in God. What am I? Well, I'm other. I'm nothing in particular. And that seems to be a growing trend within the Western world. It's definitely not accepted in the part of the world where I was born, Jordan, in the Middle East. These 3 gentlemen that you see on there are some of the most classic atheists in the world. Sigmund Freud, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Karl Marx. Sigmund Freud was responsible for psychoanalysis as the father of modern psychology. Friedrich Nietzsche is an existentialist philosopher who argued for the death of God movement back in the tail end of the 19th century. And Karl Marx was responsible for what I consider the most oppressive political system in the history of the world, communism. I have some colleagues who will take great disagreement with that position. But that's okay. That's called the Socratic Forum, where we can disagree. They are all confirmed atheists. Sigmund Freud, when he was a young man, was given his father gave him a Bible. His father was Jewish. And it said, my son, read these words for their, the breath and the living life for you. Read them, my son, and hold on to them. Later on, Freud discounted not only his God, but his father. I'll tell you about that later. This gentleman, Bertrand Arthur William Russell. Bertrand Russell wrote a book called Mathematica, one of the most brilliant treatises on mathematics in the history of philosophy. Bertrand Russell also wrote a very famous piece called Why I Am Not a Christian. That's got more circulation than his own academic work. I recommend you do read it to at least grow in your faith or to question why people not believe. These 2 gentlemen, Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, are French existentialist philosophers and playwrights. They used myth and story and literature to prove or try to establish that nothing in the world exists except me, you, and our sufferings. Strong atheists. The new atheists, which are the ones on your bookshelf now that are making billions of dollars. Richard Dawkins at Oxford University is an evolutionary biologist. Christopher Hitchens, the one on the right, which wrote the book called God is Not Great, he had died recently of esophagus cancer. Samuel Harris wrote The End of Faith. He's a neuroscientist. And Daniel Dennett is a philosopher, cognitive science philosopher who wrote Breaking the Spell. These books are called, they call them the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen of Atheism. There are many others, and their books are growing and they're selling pretty well. Let's talk about psychology. It's easy to think when a believer meets an atheist that he is foolish and not rational. And in some cases, they are irrational. In some cases, the atheist is more rational than the believer. This is sometimes the case, but not always. Now, why do people believe in God? Do they do it because it works for them and they get some kind of benefit out of it? This is called wish fulfillment theory and projection theory. Sigmund Freud said it casts doubts on the existence of God, for it is an argument from delusion or illusion. He contended that belief in God was based on wish fulfillment, a cosmic childhood neurosis that sought for a father, a projector, a cosmic image to comfort me in my distress. So I believe it so strongly that I manufacture a God that I could believe in, and I tell everyone about it. That's called wish fulfillment. God would be nice to believe in as much as there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I want to believe it, so therefore it's there. The very fact that our belief in God is based on wish fulfillment for comfort makes tragedies in life more difficult to deal with. And there's some truth to a lot of this. Liquid Feuerbach argued that the nature of God is nothing other than the expression and nature of feeling, for the object or any subject is nothing else than the subject's own nature taken objectively. So the believer in God, because they find it comforting and helpful, that is why they believe. There's a lot of truth to that. But does that discount the theist position? Does that rebut the theist position? I'm going to turn this around. This atheistic argument against God and against people who believe in God can be also applied to atheists as well. In his masterful book, The Faith of the Fatherless, psychologist and professor emeritus of psychology at the New York University and senior scholar at the Institute of Psychological Studies in Arlington, Virginia, Paul Vitz, you see him on the screen, argues that the theory provides more insight into atheism rather than theism. He shows that childhoods of prominent atheists were marked by absent or defective fathers. Sigmund Freud's father was apparently weak, sexually deviant, and religious to a point where he was a stench to Freud. Friedrich Nietzsche loved his father, a Lutheran clergyman, but his beloved father, never in good health, died when Nietzsche was only 5 years old. Thus, Nietzsche saw Christianity and God that his father followed as weak man's religion. Marx vigorously rejected his father's Borges values, including superficial conversion to Christianity. Stalin was repeatedly beaten and humiliated by his father, and Mao Zedong hated his father's aristocracy. Wutz gave evidence after evidence of this in his famous book, like about Voltaire, Hobbes, Schopenhauer, Wells, Camus, Bertrand Russell, Albert Einstein. And recently I contacted Paul Vitz, and he told me the same is also true of Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Harris as well.